Hi everyone, welcome to the first Ontario Rising Stars in Cancer Research Network Fireside Chat. My name is Kimberly Skeed and I'm a graduate student at the Ontario Institute for Cancer Research. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit and the Williams Treaty signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. We also acknowledge that since this is a virtual meeting, that many others may be on different territories, so please take the time to reflect on and honor the Indigenous communities of your territories. With that, I will turn it over to Dr. Lazzo Radwani, President and Scientific Director at the Ontario Institute for Cancer Research, who will provide us with a few opening remarks.
Thank you, Kimberly. And indeed, this is an amazing and landmark day where we inaugurate our first Fireside Chat series with really two internationally distinguished scientists who I've known for many years, and they're really good friends. And I think they went on really interesting intersecting at different journeys and can offer some really good insights to our young scientists and trainees about career choices and issues and challenges about being a scientist in various sectors in today's world. So for those of you who may not be familiar, we're supporting this series, and this series is being initiated from OICR. OICR has been in existence for 15 years, and our purpose is to drive translational, collaborative, team-based research to solve critical problems in cancer in order to be able to translate these into new therapeutics for patients and change lives. As indicated here, we collaborate, we translate, we change lives. We've been around for 15 years. We're the actually second largest funder of cancer research in Canada. Next slide. And a couple of years ago, when I attended the biannual or the translational research concept of OICR. I had a really great opportunity to interact with a lot of young scientists and a lot of our young trainees, both postdocs and graduate students, and also just interacting with our students and postdocs at OICR. And the idea came that we should really start a really exciting new venture by OICR to really bring trainees together all across the province that are doing cancer research and to really support them and to give them a voice and to be able to have them network with each other and highlight their accomplishments and their tremendous abilities, because they're, in many cases, you, the trainees, are the eyes and ears and hands in the lab for our PIs and our institute heads, et cetera, that you work for. And you really are the young people that have these really creative ideas and energy to drive them forward. And you really are the future of science and cancer research. So we thought that it would be a great thing to bring together all of you into a powerful network, which we called the Rising Stars in Cancer Research Network. And as you know, it's been taken off under the leadership of Kimberly, David, and others, and our communications team at OICR. And I really like to thank them for an amazing job they've done over the years. So to bring the network together, to have the meetings, have the steering committee, launch the website, launch the newsletter, and and other associated activities. For example, the Rising Stars Awards that will be presented at the upcoming Translational Research Conference of OICR in March. And this Fireside Chat series is just another one of our sort of things that we do to sort of help our trainees by giving them exposure to some internationally recognized scientists in different fields, so they can tell their stories about how they evolved their career and what were the trials and tribulations and what are the challenges that our young scientists may face when they embark into the world to build their scientific careers, be it in academia, biotech, or larger pharma. And so I'd like to introduce, as the next slide, please, really two really great friends of mine who I've known for many years and deeply, deeply respect, because I guess the two of them, together with their mentor originally at the National Cancer Institute, Stephen Rosenberg, really rewrote the whole book on cell therapy for cancer. Jim Yang has been there for many, many years as a senior investigator since 1987. For those of you that joined the previous OICR GLAB seminar series, he's been involved in really developing the therapy using tumor infiltrating lymphocytes, and has really breached, the envelope here. Now, identifying neoantigen specific tumor infiltrating lymphocytes, or TILs as we call them, and really developing the next generation technologies. He's also been involved in CAR T cell trials, and now is embarking on transducing TCR into T cells to really then to leverage the neoantigen reactivity of cells. And so he with his colleagues in NCI has been really the pioneers of really writing the book for all of us in this field. And Mark, who I've known also for many years, was also very instrumental in his time when he worked at the NCI in developing some of the current modalities in TIL therapy, such as the lymphoablation regimen. I met Mark in the early 2000s and was really amazed at his career trajectory and how he came there from getting a degree at MIT and working various places, and then advancing to his work at the National Cancer Institute under Steve Rosenberg. So he ran the TIL lab, so to speak, which manufactured all the GMP products for TILs for many years, and did many of the landmark clinical trials that really led to the TIL therapies we have. And some of the commercialized approaches now that we have to use TIL therapies in patients. He went to Novartis afterwards to help lead process development for their Kymriah product, which is the first CD19 CAR T cell in the market. And now he moved to Adoptimmune, where he's now the senior vice president of early stage development. And as you know, Adoptimmune is developing really novel, exciting TCR transduced T cell therapies. And so I think it's great to bring Jim and Mark together. And I also like to introduce Barbara Gunwald. Barbara is a postdoctoral research fellow at Princess Margaret Hospital at the University Health Network in the Ramakoka's lab. And she's going to be moderating the panel discussion with Mark and Jim to further interrogate and get insights for everybody, and to moderate the Q&A. So I'd like to start off first of all then, and by introducing James Yang, to sort of provide just his overview of his professional journey, and what he goes through in life as more of an academic. He's sort of the academic part of this equation. Mark is more the industrial part of the equation right now, and what advice he can give to early career researchers. So Jim, thanks, and I appreciate really learning all your insights today.
Thank you, Lazlo. When Kelly and Lazlo asked me to do this, I was thinking, I'm the worst person in the world to do this, because I found my first job right out of my residency and have been here ever since. And so, but still along the way, there are some lessons. And so just to describe how this all happened, I was always a science person, even from high school, and actually grew up right down the street from the National Cancer Institute, or National Institutes of Health. So, and I worked here in the summer. And so when I went to college, I was always going to be a science person. And I really was the senior year of college when somebody said, you should go do your science at a medical school, because they do great science and they pay better. And so I thought, okay, I'll go to medical school. So I applied to medical school really on a whim. And I actually turned down my first acceptance because I was thinking, nah, I don't really want to do that. But I'll tell you the capricious nature of all of this, because when I went to medical school at UCSD, the first week I was there, I realized this is the perfect place for me. It had the perfect combination of the intellectual stimulation, the application, and so forth. And then I went into surgery, which was really bizarre, because everyone thinks that surgeons are the carpenters of medicine, and they're not far off. Maybe plumbers is better. And so everyone was wondering why you would go into surgery. I just found it fascinating. I like to get in and fix things. And so, but when I was all done, I came back to science. And so my first job was at the National Cancer Institute. I interviewed with Steve Rosenberg. We hit it off really well. We had a great conversation. He was an incredibly generous, he was down to earth and very straightforward. And I'm thinking, I know I've met a lot of surgeons, and I don't know how long he's going to be able to keep up this act, because he was just very genuine. And so, got that job, and I've been here ever since. And so the career track, I have to admit, I had very little to do with. I made a few decisions, uninformed ones, and they worked out really well. And so it's not the best source of advice for people. I didn't take a hold of my career and engineer it and guide it and plan it and implement it. I did none of those things. And so, and it really comes down to the idea of mentorship, because it's the mentorship that gave me the opportunity to do what I wanted. And I think finding the right mentor, as you'll hear again and again, is really important. Unfortunately, all smart people can look like a good mentor in a 30-minute interview. And so you're not going to get the best information from that about, you have a good person as a mentor. That's the number one thing. It has to be a good person, a person with a good heart, a generous, kind, intelligent person as your mentor. And that's the only thing I can really say that is really important, that and you will find that out probably from the other people you talk to in the laboratory when you go for your interview. They're not going to tell you, yes, I'm not very kind, I'm not very generous. You know, they're not going to say that. So you need to find out from others, like, how has this person been as a human being? Are they a good human being? And I think that's really the main advice to give. And then, you know, there's always that balance between a big lab and a small lab, where you're a bigger fish in a smaller pond, fish in a bigger pond. They each have their pluses and minuses. I don't think there's a right answer. It a little bit depends on the individual and how good a swimmer they are. So I would say the number one piece of advice is, again, to find a good mentor who is a good human being and has an interest in you. And I think that's the major thing, and can appreciate what you can do. And so, and again, I don't have a lot of advice otherwise about how to plan your career and implement it, because I just didn't do that. Okay.
Okay, thanks. But do you have I had just a quick question, because we got a little bit of time, and in terms of just your association with other academic researchers across the world, because you've collaborated with so many people. Do you have like any insights into sort of collaborations and how to collaborate, and some of the pitfalls that you can have with collaborators? As are many of our students will go out and work in larger teams.
Yes, I will tell you the number one thing we have always done is push back against secrecy and proprietary information and all of that business, because it's killing, it's stifling. And every time a lawyer gets in the conversation, all good science stops. And so my advice really about those things, collaborations are really important for two reasons. One, if you're in a situation where you're not totally happy with your mentor or your lab, it's a big disruption and a very difficult thing to jettison that and change completely. The soft landing, or the soft approach, is to find collaborators, find other people you can work with, where you can bring other things in and you can feed off of other laboratories without having to go through the trauma of an actual separation and disruption. And so collaborators are critical for that. The other thing is, the biggest advances in the surgery branch over the 35 years I've been there, it was when somebody either came in with new skills and information, or went somewhere and learned it and came back on a sabbatical or something like that, where they came back with something we did not know about and rejuvenated the entire laboratory. And so I think that's the other thing about a collaboration. If you just go somewhere else to do the same things that you're already good at, that's not really a collaboration. But if you go somewhere into a area you know nothing about, but you perceive is going to be valuable to the goals that your laboratory has, that can be transformative for your lab and for you.
Great, thanks, Jim. No, that's great. That's a very great answer. So I'd like to give it over to Mark. And Mark, again, just as with Jim, if you can give us a little bit of your life journey or your career journey and how you got to where you are, because I think you have a really more of a diverse sort of journey from academia to catapulting to large pharma and then back to sort of biotech, which is actually a very interesting kind of trajectory. And I really appreciate your insights into, your typical day and what advice you have, for our trainees and what you've learned. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Lazlo. I'm not as confident as Jim, so I brought along a few slides to show, to talk over these. But like Jim, my career journey was not so much a plan as a random walk or maybe a random stumble. I've been opportunistic and been able to find my way into some really interesting projects and meet with some really interesting people. So I thought I might share some of the motivation, some of my motivations that have really been solid for my entire career, and give you that as a foundation for how you might project your own career forward. And I'd like to start with these three topics. I have always had this pathological curiosity, almost pathological, and the science itself has really driven me. And then we'll talk about patients and talk about some of my heroes. So the next slide, just to tell you, if you're presumably in the audience, you're a scientist and you are probably just as enthralled with the wonder of nature as I am. When I graduated, actually the day that I graduated as an undergraduate, the antennapedia complex of Drosophila was fully sequenced. At the time, that was a huge thing, sequencing a single gene. The developmental biology has always fascinated me. On the bottom, you see a fruit fly picture. A guy named Bateson in the end of the 1800s found these mutants in the wild, these fruit fly mutants that had legs on their head. That's the one on the right. On the left, they have antennae on their head. If you change a single base in one gene in a fruit fly, the antennae turn into legs. Isn't that bizarre and amazing? As we get better tools, we understand that better. And the reason is because all organisms, from insects to mammals, even more widely than that into other kingdoms, lay down a pattern first, and then the fate of the segments in the pattern are specified. And above, you can see a color coding of the expression of a single gene in flies and humans, which is from dorsal to anterior changes. I mean, just the efficiency of nature is fascinating. And I was interested in this and never thought I'd be working on it. But on the right, it turns out that blood lineages are a different kind of segmentation. Blood cells have this interesting feature of either being regenerative or differentiating. It's hard to do both at once. And way over on the right, you see, I mean, this is a very simplified picture, and you can get much better pictures of this now. But over on the right is two lineages, a B cell lineage and a T cell lineage. And at one time in the history of science, B cell lineage was known to be very complex, going from pre-B to B to plasma cells. And T cells were thought to be this, just this thing, just a T cell. That can't be. They're first cousins. The whole field of cell biology, of cell immunotherapy, has really developed partly because we understood that T cells are first cousins of B cells and have the same kind of differentiation pathway. In some cases, they use the same molecules, like the IL-7 receptor, at the same time. This concept, I guess I'm, being effusive about it. I just am really caught up in the fascination and wonder of nature. Can we go to the next slide? That has never changed. And if you follow that, you'll have fun in your career at least. My career really followed this graphic. This is the number of clinical trials in cell therapy. Way over on the left in 2002, you can see a bar with a little green band. That's the first TIL trial that Jim and I did together at the surgery branch, and it led to an understanding that lymphodepletion and cell therapy together could produce even potentially curative responses. And you can see there's a steady increase in the number of trials, which is also representative of the number of patients treated and the number and the amount of money in the field. Around 2006, the surgery branch introduced transduced T cells, the ability to put genes into cells and put them into people. And you can see that kicks off an almost linear increase in the amount of trials, patients, money in this field. But you see it really bumps up after 2012, 2013, when a commercial entity, Novartis, collaborated publicly with an academic institution, which was University of Pennsylvania, to bring these potentially curative therapies to more patients. So for 17 years, I was an academic researcher, and I loved the time that I spent at the surgery branch. We learned so much, we did so much. The challenge that I faced was doing as much as we could, 24/7, 365. We could never treat more than 100 patients a year. To really get these potentially curative treatments to more patients, we needed to have a different model. And so when Novartis and joined with UPenn, I got myself a job at Novartis. I wanted to be part of this expansion of what I felt was a process that could really help patients. And I've continued to be motivated by thinking, what can I do that helps patients? And how can my skill set bring that into treatments into the world? So the next slide, still bumping around. Think about this for a minute. Who are your heroes? I have been so lucky with my mentors. Some of my mentors are my heroes. And I encourage you all to think, who are my heroes? Well, I shared a lab bench in the surgery branch with somebody. Space was at a minimum. I'd do an experiment clean up, and then he'd do an experiment clean up, or he would do one and then I would do one. We shared this lab bench, so we got very close. And he told me that in his entire, he was an MD PhD, and in his entire PhD thesis, he didn't do anything useful except he figured out who his heroes were. And because of that, he knew what he wanted to do. And that's what actually brought him to the surgery branch. And like me, one of his heroes was Dr. Rosenberg. By the way, he's now the CMO at Moderna. His career has been very successful, and he's quite busy this year as Moderna brings a vaccine into the world. So maybe I'll tell one story about Dr. Rosenberg, and one of the things that I admire about him, he's so inspiring. One day I had 5 projects and they were all going poorly. And I thought, I'm going to go into Dr. Rosenberg's office and have him help me figure out which one I should really work on to get it to work. So I booked an hour meeting with him. I stepped through the door to his office. And the next thing I can remember, I can still remember this clearly, I was stepping out of his office, enthusiastic about all 5 projects, and I had 2 more that I had to do. He's just so inspiring. He's able to bring out the best in people. I really appreciate what Jim said, that having a strong moral compass really gives you confidence to pursue your technical expertise. So, I know that's a winding kind of story. My career has not really been pointed in a direction. It's been opportunistic, but these motivators have stayed with me and still motivate me today. So I'll stop there and turn it back over to you, Lazzo.
Thank you, Mark. That was an amazing, really, a description of your trajectory and so your vision of science, and that our curiosity and our love of science really has to drive us in the end run. I always told my graduate students and my postdocs when I was at MD Anderson running my lab that you should only be working on projects that keep you up at night. So when you go to bed at night and put your head down on your pillow, if you're not thinking about something about your project, you shouldn't be doing it. It sounds a little bit draconian, but I think it's true. And graduate students shouldn't be afraid to sort of change their projects or challenge their supervisors and mentors to say, you know what, this is just not going right. I have to be honest with you that during my graduate student career, not a single project that my mentor gave me actually worked. And I ended up, you ended up just, figuring it out yourself. So I think both of you really emphasize very strongly mentorship and the importance of finding a good mentor, and really not getting or not agreeing or being satisfied with second best. And I think that's really, really important. And I think mentorship is something that OICR is also really taking into consideration as being important. And we're also launching some mentorship training activities and educational activities for our PIs and program directors. And I think this is an area that a lot of universities and institutes and should really strongly emphasize. So I'm going to hand it over to Barbara. Barbara, welcome. Thank you for moderating sort of this discussion with Jim and Mark. So take it away.
Okay, yeah, hi. It is my great pleasure to represent the Ontario Rising Stars Network here today. Thanks, Leslie, for the introduction, and thank you, James and Mark, so much for being here today and answering all our trainee questions. We really appreciate that. So there's going to be 15 minutes now where we have a panel discussion, and I wanted it to cover 3 topics roughly. One was mentoring, and I think you set the stage for that really well. So I'll try to add more detail and tips and tricks from you for trainees in the audience. Also, I wanted to cover a little bit what were your career shaping events. So you both said it wasn't planning as much as maybe good decision making in the right moment. So maybe we can look into that for a little bit. And then also you cover the interface between academia and research so well. So maybe we can explore that because that's often a bit of a gray area for trainees. So to the audience, we will cover those 3 topics briefly now, but please participate already if you'd like to. So type your questions in the chat as they arise. I'll try to incorporate them and then we'll open the floor afterwards and get to your questions then, but keep them coming and I'll try to cover them as much as I can. So as a first question, you both emphasized that mentors played a big role. One question to both of you is, how do you then, once you find those good mentors, once you find your heroes, how do you engage with them? How do you shape a relationship with them that is permanent? And did you have any tricks or tips on how to engage them? So how to keep the relationship maybe fruitful in both ways? So what did you offer to your mentors in return to keep them engaged in your relationships?
One thing, it depends a little bit on the seniority of your mentor. For a junior mentor, I think it's really important for students to remember they were you just a little while ago. And they had all the same anxieties and sort of self shortcomings that they felt, and and they really want an ally. They feel obligated to assume the role of a supervisor in charge, knows what's happening, guiding other people. But in point of fact, they're none of those yet. And so they really want the support and the collegiality. And if they can get past that feeling of having to be the person in charge, the adult in the room, that's a very good thing. And it's probably a very good idea to encourage that, everyone feels pressure, and people tend to, junior people want to push a pressure uphill to someone else to handle it. Other people want to transfer the pressure to the people who work for them to help have them solve the problem for them. And that sort of is not the way it should work. It really should be a team where everyone feels they're part of a critical mass, they have the same goals, and they're supporting each other. And that shouldn't just go between the same level of training, it should also go up and down between, the supervisors. Now, somebody who's been running a lab for 50 years, you're probably not going to, relax and go have a beer and tell you, hey, it's okay, Dr. Rosenberg, you're still pretty good. It's not going to be the situation. But the closer they are to your level, just remember, they were you just a few years ago, and they still have all the stresses and self-doubts that everyone has.
I could build on that and maybe give a couple examples. I totally agree with what Jim just said. establishing a professional relationship with a mentor is a key step in anyone's career, getting really good mentorship. And as a mentee, you understand how much you can learn from your mentor. And often you want to learn that. What's not so obvious if you haven't been in the role of both a mentor and a mentee is the mentor often gets as much from the relationship as the person that they're teaching. And that was told to me specifically by a mentor that I had. I was asking lots of questions, and then he would turn that around and ask me a question, and I could see that he was hungry for a different perspective. And sometimes a new perspective is so rewarding for a mentor, and any mentee has that and should bring it. So that's one example. The other example that I'll give, very much along what Jim said, not only was a potential mentor of yours at one point still a student with insecurities, they always will be. Even the most senior person has some self-doubt. I was in a room and I didn't even know I was doing this. I gave my mentor a compliment. I said, wow, you know what? That was great. That was a really good idea. I really appreciate that. And that particular mentor, I could see he was like, oh, no one ever tells me that. That really helped him at that point. So I think mentees, the message there is mentees have as much to offer as the mentors do, and you should find a mentor that you can interact with at that level.
Okay, thank you. That sounds like very good advice. I'm going to jump to the next topic, which is career planning. Obviously, you don't really advocate for a lot of that, but I think it sounded to me from both of your careers that it was a lot about generating options and then taking them in the right moment. So my question would be, also looking at other people's careers that you might have observed over time. How do you feel about that? Like, how do you generate those options? How do you decide what is a good next step for you to do? And where have you seen people maybe fail or being misled by what they thought was important, and then it just led them not to take what you thought would have been a good opportunity for them?
So I start this one, Jim?
Yeah, sorry, I should have handed it to you.
Let me take this in two steps. The first is that from my perspective, my best career options have always come from a network. I do know a lot. I like knowing a lot. I like having technical discussions. But the only way that I've gotten jobs and gotten really good insight into what jobs are out there are by the people that I know. You will never be making a mistake if you are building your network. Reach out to people, put it on your schedule. Give yourself at least an hour a week where you're just gonna email people that you know or email people that you wish you know. Connect. It's even harder in the era of COVID, where we don't have meetings where you just run into people. But that is something that you can work on and accomplish, and it will only do your career well. So that's one thing that I want to say. And the other thing is, be open. I had real expectations when I left a very fast-paced academic lab for industry. And what surprised me the most, what I learned almost immediately, is the variety of career paths and options that I didn't know about. And I'll be very specific about this. In my understanding of how to advance in academia was, first you get a technician to work for you, and then you get a group of people, maybe some postdocs and technicians, and then you get your own lab and it grows bigger. And if you want to keep advancing, you get a bunch of labs and become an administrator. That hierarchical structure is all that I knew. When I went to Novartis, the most powerful person at Novartis with the most reach had one direct report. One person reported to this person, and this person was in charge of money. You can build a career not by how many people you have, but by how much knowledge you have or how much you control funding. There's a lot of different ways that you can build a career. And so that was eye-opening to me. I wish that I had a more open, I wish that I had taken a more open approach even before leaving academia. Not that I would have left earlier, but because I would have been better prepared for where I landed. I'll stop there. Over to you, Jim.
Yeah, you know, I think I would discourage people from trying to do any long-term planning because you don't know what things will be like. And you also don't know that you're going to like the goal that you aspire to because you've never done it. And so, you know, that long-term planning is not really beneficial. I think most opportunities are like mayflies. They hatch in one day and then they die the next. And so you never know what's going to be available to you. So the main thing is love your project and do it well. Because if you do, people will notice you and you'll be happy. You're doing a good job. And you convey that when you go looking for a job. And then the other thing is, so that's the number one thing is focus on your work. Do something you really believe in and enjoy. And if you do a good job, then you will set yourself up for the next stage. The next stage, though, should only be really deeply investigated at the time you need to do that. Until then, you should be working on the science and loving it. And then when you realize there's in the next 6 months or so, I'm going to have to be transitioning in some way, that's the time to sort of intensely look at what the options are, because they're not the same as they would have been last year. And so planning last year is not really, you know, reasonable. You're not going to be looking at the same set of options. And you will also be different in that last year, things that you've accomplished and done, and your interests may change. So I encourage short-term planning. You know, obviously when you have to do it, you have to do it, but look at the option. It's the same way I talk to my cancer patients. And when they say, well, what's my next treatment? I have people come in with a list of, I have these 5 things I want to plan, you know, and I just had a patient recently that I want to get this, and then I want to come for your protocol. And said, well, she developed a giant brain metastasis right in the middle. It derailed everything. And that was a huge amount of disappointment that she didn't need to go through. She needed to, I always tell patients, on the day you need the treatment, look at your options and pick the best one. Looking down the road doesn't really help because everything could be different at the time you need to make a decision. So on the day you need a decision, look at your options and pick the best one. And so it's a little like that, you know, in science. It's a little longer timeline, of course, but it's a little like that because you don't know who you will be and you don't know what options you'll be looking at when you have to make that decision. So I vote against any long-term planning.
Okay, thank you very much. So to the last question, also, I have to say my internet connection is a little bit unstable, so I apologize if I cut out. And in that case, I would ask Kimberly to take over to moderate the QA session. So we have one last question. I'll ask you to be really brief on that, and then we can open the QA session with questions from the chat. So because you both have such a valuable expertise at the interface of industry and academia, I was wondering, what's your idea of what the future is going to be like? Are those two branches going to come together more closer in the future than it maybe seems right now? And is there specific skills that you think especially younger researchers should be mindful of developing for that? So skills that you think are maybe not as represented in academia, but will be really valuable in industry and both? I'll start with James this time.
You know, I think that there's going to be more and more fusion between academia and industry because money drives that. Science has never been as well funded as it is now with the industrial component mixing in. And so I think that's inevitable. I don't think it's necessarily bad, but it has some real pitfalls. The number one thing that I feel is the idea of secrecy, which unfortunately every company requires, I think is terrible for the field. I mean, we push back and everyone who comes into the branch hears first that there's no room for secrecy if it's something that might help a patient. So that's what I always think. If my child had this cancer and somebody knew what you knew and is not telling, would I be okay with that? And that's how I make my decisions. If it's something that won't directly affect somebody, or there's no reason why it has to be disclosed, then it's optional. You can use your discretion, but most are not like that. Most, you found something that might help somebody, you should tell everybody. And we require that people tell everybody. They're not allowed to withhold it. And so I think that's where really the industrial half of the cooperation has real pitfalls, because I've run into that repeatedly, and it's not good for patients. It's not good for the field. And so that's the main thing. But I think it's inevitable that will continue and even increase. But that's the one thing I would push back against always.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark.
I think it's a great question. I don't think that industry can exist without an academic collaborative interaction. I think that the opposite's not true. And partly that's because I think that academia has really built itself and should continue to follow a path of discovery, of really high risk, high reward kind of research. Mostly industry, as Jim mentioned, is motivated by ultimately developing a product that can make money. On the way, a lot of people in the industry are not opposed to it helping people. That's certainly something that I would look forward to. With that said, the goals of industry are not to do something for the first time or show something for the first time, but to show you can get it to work every time, deliver it. And so the skill sets are a little different, and the motivations are a little different, and they can be really complementary. The industries that work out how to work with academic centers do very well, and academic centers that are sponsored by industry can also get benefit out of that. So I hope that it continues to be a viable interaction.
I'd like to ask you add one other thing to that, though, because one of the other threats is that industry can start to narrow your scientific focus, because they have a goal and they will start to sort of direct your scientific focus a bit. I think that's not a good thing either. And I will tell you that in our experience with working for companies, we made great progress and did, I think, great things working with the smallest new companies, where a new idea was being born. And like when we worked with Cetus before it was Chiron, when we worked with Kite before it sold to Gilead, when we, these were all active beginning companies with a fresh idea they were developing. Those were the most productive. The minute big pharma got involved, things ground to a halt. Now I don't talk to scientists anymore. I talk to, managers. I talk to, vice presidents who don't even know the product, and their lifespan at the company is shorter than the mayfly. So they will come in and impose draconian new directions and guidelines on you and be gone the next week. And so I have had not a good experience with big pharma because it's too cumbersome and its goals are very different from the things I'm doing. So that's the trade-off. Now, of course, they're better funded, and so they have resources that small companies don't have. But as far as the pure scientific excitement, it stopped after the company went big.
Okay. I guess there are many challenges, and there's lots of things that young researchers can hopefully contribute to tear down those walls. So I will open the floor now for the panel discussion, from the panel discussion to the open QA. So I'd encourage people to ask the question in person. So raise your hand and unmute yourself when you're called upon to ask your question. You can also type them in the chat. I'll read them out for you, but if you have a chance, maybe come on and talk to our great speakers in person. So we have a first question from the chat. It's from Amit Subidi. It came in earlier and I didn't pick it up because I thought it's maybe better for now. So he's asking, let's say you are a postdoc now. What different thing would you do in your career? Consider the current status of the PhD postdoc being oversupplied.
Yeah, I can't jump in on this. Being a postdoc was my favorite time of my whole career. In fact, I liked it so much I did 3 of them. The the reason why I say that is because you have a kind of freedom that you don't understand until you're burdened with constant. I see Laszlo nodding in agreement. The kind of administrative requirements to keep an organization running fall on senior leaders, and more and more of your time gets taken up with that. I, I can say that I rarely have opportunities to have that aha moment that really got me into science. And yet I like working with investigators because I see it all the time. They show it to me, they explain it to me, and then I can sometimes get it. But with that said, would I do anything? Would I do anything different? I think I already mentioned that I didn't understand the variety of career paths that a solid scientific education lets you pursue. And I think there are other skill sets that I wish I had known a little bit earlier. Management tools, negotiation, um, conflict resolution, the things that people learn from managing. I think it's really, the earlier you can pick those up, the better off you'll be. There's another set of tools that I think is very helpful for projects, which are best summed up as project management approaches. So this is something that's really universal in industry and very infrequently applied in science, basic science, but I think that skill set can really help enable decisions and progress. So yeah, I think there's opportunities that I missed that I would could potentially rethink about.
Yeah, my career path is a little different, but it's similar in that there were times when you struggled to attain a certain competence and ability, and then you enjoyed a glide, and then you had to do it again. And I would agree with Mark. I would enjoy the glide a little longer, because there's times when you're doing things and you're good at it, and the feeling of being the only human on earth that knows something for one day is to me irreplaceable. I mean, you do an experiment, you discover something, you're the only person in 8 billion people who knows this. And it's just a wonderful feeling, and then you want to tell everybody. You don't want to write it, you just want to tell them. And so, it's to enjoy those times a little more rather than constantly be looking for another little hill to climb and a hill to climb. But I can't really say I would change a lot, because even the bad research experience I've had, I spent a year at the VA doing, I'm not even sure what, but it still provided me with insights and some information and skills that were useful. It didn't accomplish anything that I think was useful. And so I wouldn't have wanted to last 5 years, but I wouldn't go back and eliminate it necessarily. That's the only way you can find ultimately what will really be a good situation for you.
Okay, thank you very much. So Kelly was friendly to just type in the chat how participants can raise their hand to ask questions in person. I didn't see any raised hands now, so I'll continue with a question that we didn't have time to cover earlier, and it is a bit about conflict management. So if you have good mentors or you create those opportunities, I think there are also those that maybe you feel you don't want to take. So you might disagree with superiors or mentors on what's the right thing to do, and you might decide to do something differently and go against their advice. So did you have any experiences like that, and how would you recommend to navigate that?
Well, it's the reason that my number one principle is work for a decent human being, because decent human beings deal with that better than indecent human beings. And so, you can never predict whether you're going to run into a conflict with the people you work alongside or something, but the tone of the lab is set by the head of the lab. And so if there is conflict and it goes badly, it's because the head of the lab either does that or allows that. And so the only way you can anticipate that is the principle of try and work for a decent human being and find out from the people around you who are working whether they are a decent human being, because that's really the only assurance you have that you can deal with a situation like that, which you can't predict.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll hand it over to Kimberly. She had a question.
Sure, I'm happy to jump in. First of all, thank you so much for all of your insights. I think it's really heartwarming just to see the excitement about science. That's something which is really refreshing, but also just to see the emphasis placed on, as you said, Dr. Yang, being a good human being. So that's something for me, which I actually wanted to follow up on a little bit, as I think I'm at a stage in my career where this is something that I'm thinking a lot about. If I do choose to stay in research, what does that look like, both with respect to the lab that I want to establish one day, but also the tone setting for that lab. So just because we have a number of trainees on the call, and I suspect that many people are grappling with that same question, I was wondering if you have any insights on how you attempted to do that in starting your career, actually, both with respect to choosing, those questions that really drove you, and you thought, well, how I'm going to spend part of my life focused on this particular question, but also the tone with which you approached establishing a lab and getting it up off the ground.
Yeah, I think the biggest mistake supervisors make is being defensive, being somehow feel that anything could be reflected on them. It's the same way that, spouses, like their spouse did something that made them look bad. No such thing, really. It's the same thing where you feel that if someone raises a point, discusses something, pushes back, it's a reflection on you. That you just have to get past that. And the best labs and the best times in the lab have been when everyone is working together as a critical mass, because they all know what they want to accomplish. The other thing is to know initially on a project when it will be done, what will tell you it has worked, where you have a goal. Everyone knows, I want to get to this experiment. This is the one I envision, and this will say yes or no on the project. And if it's no, accept that and move on rather than try and rework it into something, So that's the whole idea of patching things up, being defensive, trying to wonder how it makes you look. Very bad sort of thing, and you should avoid that. And be open to, any idea, because it's not a reflection on your skills as a supervisor.
It's a great question. It is a challenge to change roles. If you look around at different labs that you're familiar with, you could see that some labs really reflect the personality of the lab head. As Jim said, that's really, so one of the things you can ask is, how do I want my lab to look, and what traits can I project to get to be in that group? And I think most people generally agree: collaboration, honesty, openness, fairness. It's useful to be able to project those into your group. I would say it can also be helpful to have a little humility. It never hurts to say, "Gee, I'm sorry, I made a mistake," and that also gives other people permission to do that. And finally, I would say that especially if you are trying to set up a culture or a way of working, if you run into a specific example that's really difficult to understand what to do with, it's great to get a diversity of opinions. You can do that as you're setting up. You can use specific examples to really hone your approach and your lab's philosophy and culture.
I think it's almost good to reflexively get other opinions, because you never know what you don't know. And I can tell you that Steve Rosenberg talks to everybody and asks what they think all the time. And you feel the image in your mind of a supervisor is they should always know what's you need to do and what's happening and be in charge. That you need to actively push back against that, where you almost reflects, even if you think ask ask anyways what other people think, because it's a good habit. The other habit is very bad.
For sure. So I would like to squeeze in one last question from Carrie. She had her hand up for a long time. I'll ask you to be concise in your answers, maybe, because we'll have to wrap it up real soon.
Oh, yes. Sorry, I cannot turn my camera on because my camera is currently blocked. And thank you so much for being here and sharing your experience with us today. So I have two quick questions. First, back to the skills we talked about. Do you mind sharing some tips on how to develop certain skills? For example, the management negotiation skills Dr. Dudley has mentioned. And secondly, can you please share a bit of tips on how do you motivate yourselves when things don't go well? Thank you.
Maybe we'll start with Mark. Yeah.
So many examples of things not going well. It's hard to sort of pick among them. That is the role of a scientist, isn't it? I can say that maybe a very specific and challenging case was when we gave a patient new therapy, and we had high hopes for it being effective, and instead it was quite toxic. This really demotivated me a lot, and I had to work through this for myself to understand how comfortable I am with risk benefit in early patient trials. I'm sure Jim probably has a million of these exact stories. What I can say also was that I was helped by a patient who I saw the x-rays before they did. I know that this patient didn't respond. The patient saw me in the lunchroom and came over and said, I just want to thank you for everything you've done. You know, you gave me hope. And that really surprised and educated me, that we don't always know all the time all of the outcomes. And so even when something is failing, ultimately you may get a lesson that's really valuable. I don't know if that helps you motivate yourself, but for me, knowing that the immediate perception may not be the final one is really helpful. In terms of skills, I'll be probably more open than I should be. I Google management tools, and there are probably 1,000 articles on negotiation. And if you look at a syllabus for a business degree, you'll see some of the other things that will really help you, potentially skills that you might be valuable as you negotiate your career.
Yeah, I have to say I've never negotiated my career ever. So again, I'm not very good at this. I never asked the question. I didn't even know, for 20 years, I didn't even really know that I wasn't a senior investigator, because my budget and everything else I had seemed like that. So I didn't even realize I wasn't in the right tier. And then when I needed to hire a senior scientist, they go, you can't have a senior scientist. You're not in this highest tier. I go, okay, well, I'd like to be. And they said, okay. And that's the way it worked. But for 20 years, I didn't even know it. So I'm not very good at negotiation, I have to say. But, you know, one of the things, if you're in a rough spot and you're struggling, you know, there's again, that idea of long-term planning. This is going to ruin my long-term planning. Nothing lasts forever. Gone through periods where you didn't get a good review, you know, or you felt a little embarrassed or humiliated, you know, and you got to go through some remediation sort of thing where, you know, and you feel it's unjustified. That I forgot about all that. 2 years later, it was in the rearview mirror. I didn't even remember any of that. So again, it doesn't last forever. Everything sort of, even big bumps in the road go by quickly. You just got to be doing something you really believe in and you think is a fun and good thing to do. And those little bumps in the road, you know, you just grit your teeth and you put up with them. You feel bad and then you don't feel bad. So I think that's really all I can tell you. I don't think there's any way to mitigate some of the, if you get negative feedback, there's a way to mitigate the hurt or the feeling of that. It just wears off.
I think that's an excellent closing remark. the pain will end eventually.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you guys so much. It was super insightful. Thanks for sharing all the experiences. I am taking away so much from this. Handing it back to Lazlo for the closing remarks. Thank you all.
Am I on? Yeah. Anyway, thank you, Jim and Mark, again, for all these remarkable insights and really a peek into your career and into your brains, you know, and your thoughts. And I think, yeah, I think we all benefited. I even learned, you know, a few things, you know, and I think that's really the important thing as scientists and mentors and leaders is that you should never wake up every day thinking you know everything. You should actually have the guts to wake up every morning and feel stupid, that I don't know anything and I'm willing to learn and learn something new from the people who I work with, my peers and my mentees and my students and postdocs. And I think that, you know, this compassion, empathy, mindfulness. And as a leader, I think what we learned today is that it's really not, the word leader is kind of almost a misnomer. You're a facilitator. You're a facilitator of people. As Ralph Lewontin said, science is a social institution and we carry all our social baggage, our upbringing and everything to the job. And sometimes we need to learn how to throw that baggage away and embrace a new way of thinking. And I think another thing that really kind of resonated with me is spontaneity is critical. There's no preset recipe for your career. You have to be able to embrace change and to really like change and want change, because sometimes it's those change that, you know, get you out of your comfort zone that opens up those amazing opportunities that you would have never had. And the other lesson that I've learned, and I think that you can learn from Jim and Mark, is that really just sticking to, you know, what you're doing and striving for excellence, and also presenting your work and networking and communicating to your peers and to as much of the world, and working with a mentor that allows you to present your results and your data at conferences. That opens up doors. And then those doors then open up other doors. And then as a person who's highly educated and with a lot of common sense, then when those doors, different doors open, yeah, and you can make those spontaneous decisions. Well, do I do this or I do that? And I think the other thing that I took away is think well and think hard about whether, you know, you want to stay in academia or go to industry. Industry, you know, speaking from experience, sometimes when you're a young scientist, you think, I'm going to go to industry, I'm going to make all this money. It's like, great. You know, I can tell you one thing, the grass looks always greener on the other side of the fence, and it's sometimes not many times. And so I do agree with Mark and with Jim that, you know, it's a different mindset in industry. And I learned that, you know, I guess the hard way being, you know, at EMD Serono, where, you know, I went in there wanting to do all these amazing things. And I realized, you know what, after 3 years, I don't fit in here. And that's why coming to ICR, to an academic, more of an academic environment is what's important. So finding what suits you. So again, I'd like to really thank Jim and Mark for coming on. And I also want to say that this is hopefully the first of many fireside chats. And please go to our website, our Twitter feeds, email us if you have any questions, email me if you have any questions. And hopefully we're having another, we're planning another event, I think for April, I think, Kelly. And so I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today, and have a nice rest of the day.